Yo, what's up, animals? Sungila Z Musical Gangster here. And I'm about to read some more of The Trumpet of the Swan by E.B. White, y'all. Chapter 7, School Days. A few days after the swans arrived at their winter crib on the Red Rock Lakes, Lewis had an idea. He decided, since he was unable to use his voice, he should learn to read and write. If I'm defective in one respect, he said to himself, I should try and develop myself along other lines. I'll learn to read and write. Then I will hang a small slate around my neck and carry a chalk pencil. That way I'll be able to communicate with anybody who can read. Lewis liked company, and he already had many friends on the lake, homies on the lake. The place was a sort of a sanctuary for water birds. Swans, geese, ducks, and other waterfowl. They lived there because it was a safe place, and because the water stayed warm even in the coldest winter weather. Lewis was greatly admired for his ability as a swimmer. He liked to compete with other cygnets to see who could swim underwater the great distance and stay down the longest. When Lewis fully made up his mind about learning to read and write, he decided to visit his homie Sam Beaver and get help from him. Perhaps, thought Lewis, Sam will help me go to school with him, and the teacher will show me how to write. The idea excited him. He wondered whether a young swan would be accepted in a classroom full of children. He wondered whether it was hard to learn to read. Most of all, he wondered whether he could find Sam. Montana was a big state. It is a big state. He wasn't even sure Sam lived in Montana, but he hoped he did. Next morning, when his mom and dad weren't looking, Lewis took off into the air. He flew northeast. When he came to the Yellowstone River, he followed it to the sweetgrass country. When he saw the town beneath him, he landed next to the schoolhouse and waited for the boys and girls to be let out. Lewis looked at every boy, hoping to see Sam, but Sam wasn't there. Wrong town, wrong school, thought Lewis. I'll try again. He flew off, found another town, and located the school, but all the boys and girls had gone home for the day. I'll just have to look around anyway, thought Lewis. He didn't dare walk down the main street for fear somebody would shoot him. Instead, he took to the air and circled round, flying low and looking carefully at every boy in sight. After about 10 minutes, he saw a ranch house where a boy was splitting wood near the kitchen door. The boy had black hair. Lewis glided down. I'm lucky, he thought. It's Sam. When Sam saw the swan, he laid down his axe and stood perfectly still. Sam walked up to him timidly, then reached down and untied his shoelace. As you can see. Hello, said Sam in a friendly voice. Lewis tried to say, burp, burp, but not a sound came from his throat. I know you, said Sam. You're the swan that never said anything and used to pull my shoelaces. Lewis nodded. I'm glad to see you, said Sam. What can I do for you? Lewis just stared straight ahead. Are you hungry? Said Sam. Lewis shook his head. Thirsty? Lewis shook his head. Want to stay overnight with us here in the ranch? Asked Sam. Lewis nodded his head and jumped up and down. Okay, said Sam. We have plenty of room. It's just a question of getting my father's permission. Sam picked up his axe, laid a stick of wood on the chopping block, and split the log neatly down the middle. He looked at Lewis. There's something wrong with your voice, isn't it? Voice isn't there? He asked. Lewis nodded. Pumpkin's head, neck up and down. Hard. He knew Sam was his homie, although he didn't know that Sam had once saved his mother's life. His mom's life. In a few minutes, Mr. Beaver rode into the yard on a cow pony. He got off and tied the pony to the rail. What you got there? He asked Sam. It's a young trumpeter swan, said Sam. He's a few months old. Will you let me keep him here a while? Well, said Mr. Beaver, I think it's against the law to hold one of these wild birds in captivity. But I'll phone the game warden and see what he says. If he says yes, you can keep him. Tell the warden the swan has something the matter with him, called Sam, as his father started toward the house. What's wrong with him? Asked his father. He has a speech problem, replied Sam. Something's wrong with his throat. What are you talking about? Well, who ever heard of a swan with a speech problem? Well, said Sam, this is a trumpeter swan that can't trumpet. He's mute. He's speechless. Can't make a sound. Mr. Beaver looked at his son as though he didn't know whether to believe him or not. But he went into the house. In a few minutes he came back. The warden says you can keep the young swan here for a while if you can help him. But sooner or later the bird will have to go back to the Red Rock Lakes, where he belongs. The warden said he won't let anybody have a young swan, but he let you have one because you understand about birds and he trusts you. That's quite a compliment, son. Mr. Beaver looked pleased. Sam looked happy. Lewis felt greatly relieved. After a while, everyone came in to supper in the kitchen of the ranch house. Mrs. Beaver allowed Lewis to stand beside Sam's chair. He fed him some corn and some oats, which tasted good. Sam was ready for bed. He wanted Lewis to sleep in his room with him. Mrs. Beaver said, No, he's no canary. He'll mess up the room. He's enormous. Put him outside in the barn. He can sleep with the horses. The horses won't mind. One of the empty stalls. The horses won't mind. Next morning, Sam took Lewis to school with him. Sam rode his pony, and Lewis flew along. At the schoolhouse, the other children were amazed to see this great white bird with his long neck, bright eyes, and big feet. Sam introduced them to the teacher of the first grade, Mrs. Hammerbotham, who was short and big round the middle. Sam explained that Lewis wanted to read and write because he was unable to make any sound with his throat. Mrs. Hammerbotham stared at Lewis. Then she shook her head. No birds, she said. I got enough trouble. Sam looked disappointed. Please, Mrs. Hammerbottom, he said. Please let him stand in your class and learn to read and write. Why does a bird need to read and write? Replied the teacher. Only people need to communicate with one another. That's not quite true, Mrs. Hammerbottom, said Sam. If you'll excuse me for saying so, I have watched birds and animals a great deal. All birds and animals talk to one another. They really have to in order to get along. Mothers have to talk to their young. Males have to talk to females, particularly in the springtime of the year when they are in love. In love? Said Mrs. Hammerbottom, who seemed to perk up at this. What do you know of love? Sam blushed. What kind of bird is he? She asked. He's a young trumpeter swan, said Sam. Right now, he's sort of a dirty gray color, but in another year, he'll be the most beautiful thing you ever saw. Sorry. Pure white with black bill and black feet. He was hatched last spring in Canada and now lives in the Red Rock Lakes. You can't say "brr" the way the other swans can. This puts him at a terrible disadvantage. Why? Asked the teacher. Because it does, said Sam. If you wanted to say "brr" couldn't make a single solitary sound, wouldn't you feel worried? I don't want to say "brr," replied Mrs. Hammerbottom. I don't even know what it means. Anyway, this is all foolishness, Sam. What makes you think a bird can learn to read and write? It's impossible. Give him a chance, pleaded Sam. He is well behaved, he's bright, he's got very serious speech defect. What's his name? I don't know, replied Sam. Well, said Mrs. Hammerbottom, if he's coming into my class, he's got to have a name. Maybe we can name him. Find out who he is. She looked at the bird. Is your name Joe? Nope. Jonathan? Donald? Is your name Lewis? That means yes. Great Caesar's ghost! Cried the teacher. Look at those wings. Lewis, you may join the class. Stand right here by the blackboard. And don't mess up the room either. If you need to go outdoors for any reason, raise one wing. Lewis nodded. First graders cheered. Yay, yay, yay. They liked the looks of their new pupil and were eager to see what he could do. Quiet, children, said Mrs. Hammerbottom. We'll start with the letter A. She picked up a piece of chalk and made a big A on the blackboard. Now you try, Lewis. Lewis grabbed a piece of chalk in his bill and drew a perfect A right under the one the teacher had drawn. You see, said Sam, he's an unusual bird. Well, said Mrs. Hammerbottom, A is easy. Give him something harder. I'll give him something harder. She wrote cat on the board. Let's see you write cat, Lewis. Lewis wrote cat. Well, cat is easy too, muttered the teacher. Cat is easy because it's short. Can anyone think of a word that is longer than cat? Catastrophe, said Charlie Nelson, who sat in the first row. Good, said Mrs. Hammerbottom. That's a good word, hard word. But does anybody know what it means? What is a catastrophe? An earthquake, said one of the girls. Correct, said the teacher. What else? War is a catastrophe, said Charlie Nelson. Correct, replied Mrs. Higginbotham. What else is? Very small, red-headed girl named Jenny raised her hand. Yes, Jenny, it is a catastrophe. Small, high voice, Jenny said. When you get ready to go on a picnic with your father and mother, and you make peanut butter jelly sandwiches and jelly rolls, and put them in the thermos box with bananas, and an apple and some raisin cookies and napkins and some bottles of pop soda and a few hard-boiled eggs, and then you put them in the thermos box in your car, and then just as it's starting out, it starts to rain, and your parents say it's no point now having a picnic in the rain. It's a catastrophe. Very good, Jenny, said Mrs. Higginbotham. It isn't as bad as an earthquake, and it isn't as bad as a war. But when a picnic gets called on account of rain, it is a catastrophe for a child, I guess. Anyway, catastrophe is a good word. No bird can write that word, I'll bet. If I can teach a bird to write catastrophe, it'll be big news all over the sweet-grass country. I'll get my picture in Life magazine. I'll be famous. Thinking of all these things, she stepped to the blackboard and wrote, catastrophe. Okay, Lewis, let's see you write that. Lewis picked up the fresh piece of chalk in his bill. He was scared. Took a good look at the word. A long word, he thought. It's really no harder than a short one. I'll just copy one letter at a time, and pretty soon it'll be finished. Besides, my life is a catastrophe. It's a catastrophe to be without a voice. Then he began writing catastrophe, he wrote, making each letter very neat. He got to the last letter. The pupils clapped and stomped their feet and banged on their desks. And one boy quickly made a paper airplane and zoomed it into the air. Mrs. Higginbotham rapped for order. Very good, Lewis, she said. Sam, it's time for you to We went to your classroom. You shouldn't be in my room. Go and join the 5th graders. Okay? I'll take care of your friend the swan. Back in his own room, Sam sat down at his desk, feeling very happy about the way things had turned out. The 5th graders were having a lesson in arithmetic, and the teacher, Miss Annie Snug, greeted Sam with a question. Miss Snug was young and beautiful. Sam, if a man can walk 3 miles in 1 hour, how many miles can he walk in 4 hours? It would depend on how tired he got after the first hour, said Sam. The whole other people snored with laughter. The Snug rapped for order. Sam is quite right, she said. I never looked at the problem that way before. I always supposed that man could walk 12 miles in 4 hours, but Sam may be right. That man may not feel so spunky after the first hour. He may drag his feet. He may slow up. Albert Bigelow raised his hand. My father knew a man who tried to walk 12 miles, and he died of heart failure, said Albert. Goodness, said the teacher. I suppose that could happen too. Anything can happen in 4 hours. A man might develop a blister on his heel, or he might find some berries growing along the road and stop to pick them up. That would slow him up, even if he wasn't tired or didn't have blisters. It would indeed, agreed the teacher. Well, children, I think we have learned a great deal about arithmetic this morning, thanks to Sam Beaver. And now here's your problem for one of the girls in the room. If you are feeding a baby from a bottle and you give the baby 8 ounces of milk in one feeding, how many ounces of milk would the baby drink in 2 feedings? Linda Staples raised her hand. About 15 ounces, she said. Why is that? Asked Miss Snug. Why wouldn't the baby drink 16 ounces? Because he spilled a little milk each time, said Linda. He runs out of the corner of his mouth and gets on his mother's apron. So that's what the class was howling with laughter so loud. Arithmetic lesson had to be abandoned. But everyone had learned how careful you must be when dealing with figures. Believe me. Anyway, that's chapter 7 of The Trumpet of the Swan.